Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming into the cold night and joining us. Tonight's event has been organized in relation to our current exhibition upstairs, which hopefully you've seen, called Welcome to My World, which is an exhibition that presents some of the artwork that has been produced in recent years through Artist Space's Expanded Art Ideas program, as well as some archival material from the program's activities in the early 2000s. Expanded Art Ideas places artist educators in two schools, PS 140 in the Lower East Side and MS 324 in Washington Heights, and provides access to a range of art classes and projects for 7th and 8th graders. Tonight's forum provides an opportunity to focus in on and discuss the current state of art education in New York City's schools. While Mayor Bill de Blasio has recently made art education for all the city's pupils a priority, it is evident that funding limitations and shifting policies over the last decade have created highly variable levels of access to the arts within public schools. There's been an increase in the reliance on outside organizations to provide art teaching, both through programs in galleries and museums and those based in schools. Such shifts in the educational landscape, alongside increasing wealth disparity in the city, raise urgent questions around future engagement with the arts and how systemic deficiencies in education across different communities might impact on the long-term character of cultural production in the city. The role of practicing and artists and art organizations in relation to these concerns also seems crucial to address, both in terms of questions of basic provision and with regard to the very nature of how artistic practices function in pedagogical environments. So hopefully the discussion this evening will cover much of this territory, and we're very pleased to be joined by a group of participants who each bring specific insights into this subject. The conversation will be moderated by Dipti Desai, who is the director of the Graduate Art and Art Education programs at NYU Steinhardt, and also the co-editor of the 2014 publication Social Justice and the Arts. Doug Israel is the Director of Research and Policy for the Center for Arts Education and has been involved in lobbying for access to art education in New York City schools, resulting in recent policy provisions by Mayor de Blasio that Doug will speak about tonight. Carmen Fulford is currently an assistant principal at Nathan Strauss PS 140 on the Lower East Side and has 33 years of experience as an educator with the Department of Education. At PS 140, she supervises a 21st Century grant, which provides the school with access to services from community-based organizations, as well as a variety of after-school programs. Robert Sember is an artist and scholar and a member of the international sound art collective Ultra Red, which collaborates with constituencies involved in migrant rights, fair housing and anti-racist struggles, and efforts to combat the AIDS crisis. Ultra Red's projects have included Reassembly, a long-term project on migration and citizenship with students and teachers in the West London School. Joy Episalla is a multidisciplinary New York-based artist and a founding member of the lesbian art collective Fierce Pussy. She has worked with the Expanded Art Ideas program at Artist Space as an art educator for the past 9 years, running a photo club at PS 140. And Chrysanne Stathacos is an artist and the director of education for the Expanded Art Ideas program at Artist Space. She co-founded Expanded Art Ideas in 1996, firstly as a programmer of thread waxing space before moving to Artist Space in 2001. So thank you to all our participants, and I'll hand over to Dipti to start the conversation. Do you want to? Or we can hear from Doug first, if you like.
I think Doug was going to speak first.
Okay, so maybe that's the way we'll start, is Doug, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit.
Context.
Thank you.
How does this? Can I lean back like this and talk? Can you all hear me? Good. So my name is Doug Israel. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Center for Arts Education. I'll tell you real quickly what we do, and then I'll jump into the more interesting stuff. We're committed to bringing arts education to New York City public school students, pre-K through 12th grade, making sure it's part of their school day curriculum. We do it in 3 primary ways. First, we actually do real live programs in the schools with students, dance, music, theater, visual arts. Second, we also do professional development with arts teachers, as well as general classroom teachers, teaching artists, and then leadership training with principals and APs on how to, integrate the arts into the school day. How do you raise funds for the arts? How do you build sustainable partnerships with culture organizations, and so on. The third spoke in the wheel is more of the work I'm engaged with. We also do advocacy and public engagement, advocating and promoting and supporting policies and funding decisions that will lead to the expansion and improvement of arts education in city schools. So I've been at this for about 6 years with the Center for Arts Education. My personal background is I come from a family of New York City educators. Both my sisters work in New York City public schools. One's a guidance counselor, one's a school psychologist. My mother was a classroom teacher for 30 years in New York City, and her partner was an arts teacher on the Upper West Side. And up until about 3 years ago, she had her art classroom taken away, and for 2 years was forced to bring art supplies and materials classroom to classroom in a cart, and ultimately decided that was not what she signed up for. An hour class was shrunk down to 35 minutes by packing up your cart and cleaning up everything. And so she retired 2 years ago. And so, I've been involved, actually. It's a passion of mine, but I have a background in politics and policy and working on campaigns, protecting sea turtles, campaign finance reform, and now arts education. So I've been asked today to provide a brief overview of the status of arts education in New York City public schools, and then to talk about the mayor and the city council's new initiative to expand arts education. So I'll jump right in. So I have some bad news to share, and I have some really great news, and I'm going to start with the bad. Over the past 7 to 10 years here in New York City, we have seen drastic declines in funding for arts education in city schools. And this is kind of the culmination of decisions made at the school building level. We've seen declines since 06, 07 of 47%, $13 million a year. Decline in funding for arts partnerships. These are like field trips to cultural institutions, bringing teaching artists and professional artists into the school building for week-long residencies, year-long partnerships, and so on. We have seen a decline since 06, 07, 84% in how much schools are budgeting and spending for art supplies and instruments. To the tune of, we now spend about $2 million a year. Collectively, each school spends $2 million a year on art supplies and instruments. We have 1 million kids, so that's an average of $2 per student we spend on art supplies and instruments. Clearly, schools spend hundreds, if not thousands. So what that means is, when you average it out, there are schools that are spending zero. Or close to that. So kind of depressing. And during that same time, over the past 7 to 10 years, since 06, 07, we've lost 63 arts teachers citywide. And this doesn't sound like a tremendous amount when you consider we have 1 million kids and 1,700 schools. But in that time, since we lost 63 arts teachers, we've also opened 300 new schools in New York City. And so while we're opening more schools but less arts teachers, bad combination for our kids. And as you can guess, this is just kind of the bird's eye view, but there are real inequities in what's being offered school to school. We have some of the greatest arts education programs in the nation, if not the world. You think of LaGuardia, Frank Sinatra, these are institutions, educational institutions, public schools that are the envy of countries around the world. But we also have schools that have little to no arts. And I'm not talking 2 or 5 schools. I'm talking about hundreds of schools that are providing barely any arts education at all here in New York City, the cultural capital of the world. And in fact, the New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer, released a report in April of this year that specifically looked at arts teachers, cultural partnerships, and spaces dedicated to the arts in schools. And what he found, that there were tremendous inequities in what's being offered. Specifically, he found, when you looked out across all of New York City, about 20% of our schools, 1 out of every 5 schools has no arts teacher whatsoever. No music, no dance, no theater, no full-time, no part-time. 0 arts teacher. 20% of our schools, that's about 300 schools in New York City, have no arts teacher. It's as if every single school in Philadelphia, if not a single school in Philadelphia had an arts teacher. Like every kid going to school, K through 12 Philadelphia, never having an art teacher. That's how many schools don't have an arts teacher in New York City. 16% of schools have no partnerships whatsoever. They're not going on field trips to cultural institutions. They're not bringing professional artists into the schools. It's about 250 schools, according to this report, that had no partnership. And the real kicker here, and this is what attracted a lot of attention, and rightly so, half of the schools that without a teacher, without a partnership, were located in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn, which is tremendously disproportionate. But to tell you the truth, it was not shocking to any of us who work in the field and who know socioeconomic realities of New York City. And it's not just the arts that these communities don't have. There's a ton of other services and educational opportunities that these kids don't have. But laying it out the way that the comptroller did really, I think, made a very clear case about the inequities and really kind of galvanized our elected officials and our city to actually act and to do something. And so here's the good news. This July, the mayor and the city council got together and came to an agreement to add an additional brand new $23 million a year into the city's budget, into the DOE's budget for arts education each year over the next 4 years. So $92 million in new money that is going to be specifically targeted towards addressing these inequities. And I think a lot of this has to do, this report was released in April. We had a mayor that ran on the theme of uniting New York and the tale of two cities and addressing inequities. And so this report comes out and really clearly highlights what's going on here in terms of educational opportunity. And the city council and the mayor stepped up to the plate and saw an issue that needed to be addressed, and they're putting very significant money into doing it. So this is great news. And just real quickly, wanted to outline what this initiative will do, because there's some really great programs here. $5 million this year is going towards hiring brand new arts teachers in schools that had either no art teacher or not enough art teachers to serve their student body. They've already, since this program's been announced, they've placed arts teachers in 80 schools that never had an arts teacher before, which is, I think, great. It's only, a third of the way to the 300 schools, or not even, but they're getting there. $2.5 million for partnerships. All this money has already been dedicated and allocated to schools. 125 schools are having an arts partnership because of this new funding. Programs specifically for engaging English language learners and students with special needs through the arts. Programs to increase family engagement through the arts. So some really great stuff. In addition to that, $5 million to restore and refurbish arts facilities and spaces, dance classrooms, auditoriums, new technology. So that also should have a significant impact on the quality of arts education being offered. And then there's a couple other program initiatives that fall under this to round it out to the $23 million. But ultimately, it's a really exciting development, and I really commend the comptroller for releasing this report. I think it really speaks to the importance of building relationships with elected officials and the real power that good data and reporting can have, and also committed advocacy. And then commend the mayor and the city council for taking this on. And so, ultimately, we see over the next couple of years working to ensure that this funding continues for the 4 years and beyond, and also ensuring that it really is targeted to address those inequities. Because if the money just gets spent to fund another art program in a school, in a neighborhood that has it and has great arts programming, it really is not addressing the inequities and getting to the real heart of the matter here. So we're going to keep our eye on the ball, making sure it's targeted and it has the impact, and sharing that impact and sharing that story with our elected officials and the city at large, so people know that there are actually good things happening in our public schools, and this is one significant, great investment, and we need to let the mayor, city council, and the chancellor know that we support and believe in this type of investment in our public school students. So that's it for the overview piece. I hope this provides some good fodder for discussion. I look forward to hearing what all of our other panelists have to say, and hearing, discussing other ways we may improve and expand the arts education being offered. Thank you.
Should we have, Carmen, do you
Sure.
want to talk?
Sure.
Since she's on the other side of
From the other side,
education
yes.
debate.
So our school has been incredibly fortunate for the past 13 years to have formed this relationship that we have with Artist Space and the expanded art ideas. They really believed and supported like my vision for what I thought students should be getting because they didn't have any arts in the schools. And they really worked towards developing that vision. We really started out, when I first came to that school 13 years ago, I actually was hired as a dean for the middle school, because we're a pre-K to 8 school. And then a year and a half into that, I became the assistant principal, and then I began to oversee the different programs. So when we first met, and Artist Space was actually already in the school, they were just doing a portfolio program. So in other words, preparing 8th graders to go to auditions come October, November in their 8th grade year in applying for high schools. As a result of this relationship that we've developed over the years, we expanded to have a photography club, which now also has a gallery, and we have this tremendous photography wall on our first floor. We have a poetry slam every year and a poetry book that gets published as a result of our relationship with Artist Space. So, and again, none of that could have been possible had we not had the 21st Century Grant. So none of the money came from the Department of Education. When I first came to the school, there was one art teacher. She actually did have a room. And 2 or 3 years into that, she also experienced what your sister experienced in having to travel from room to room, and she decided to retire. So, but there are so many benefits to students that have the opportunity to experience art. I mean, it just boosts their self-esteem, they become confident, they use their creativity. It develops skills like just reflecting, just being able to look at their art and then reflect on that to see how they want to improve their artwork. Excuse me. They are just able to look at the world through a different lens. And I just remember that experience for myself when I took photography in high school. I just really looked at the world so differently after that, after the experience of using a camera and just looking at everything sort of in this frame. And to this day, I still do that. So I really wanted that experience for our kids. It develops commitment, it develops camaraderie. In particular, the group from last year, which is a group that worked with Joy, I mean, they were just so supportive of their work when they critiqued it, right? And they just looked at each other's work in a way that in some ways actually made them also better students. You know, it gave them more of a view of the world, not just academics, but really of the world. They really take pride, they take such pride in their work. I mean, when they walked into the exhibit upstairs and saw their work hung up like so professionally, I heard one young lady, Pamela, who Susan knows really well, she turned around to her friend and said, "I'm so famous now," you know? And just, but it was so genuine and so pure and so like just wonderful to hear those words, right? I think also it creates a respect for other work, you know, not just their own, but just to be able to look at someone else's work. And even whether you like it or not, you just respect the work and the time that it took to create, you know, that photograph or to create that piece. And I really truly feel that it just makes them become better students. They just pay more attention to their schoolwork, to also then be able to have these opportunities, to be involved in art, to join the photography club. I mean, the photography club doesn't start now till the spring, and as soon as September starts, I have students coming to me, "Can I join the photography club? Can I join the photography club?" And I think we've also established, through our partnership, we've established a lot of traditions, you know, in our school through the arts. And another tradition for us now is in June, we have the opening of the gallery. So that's our big art / poetry now day. And, the kids look forward to that opening. The other classes want to go visit the gallery once it's open. And now we've expanded that to actually include just really a opening that begins in the auditorium with kids talking about their experience, students talking about their experience of the arts, and then having them read their poetry, and then inviting other artists and other guests to be part of that experience as well. Sort of addressing how art education is administered by the Department of Education, since I've been in it for so many decades now, and I've experienced a lot of change with it. And again, based on my experiences, I've been at 4 different schools, and based on my experience, it really is tied to the resources that the school has in particular, and also the commitment of the administration, because I feel like if we weren't really committed to supporting an organization coming into our school and then expanding on the ideas that they're offering and that they're sharing, we wouldn't be able really to get to the level that our school has gotten to. But going back to what was said about the resources, you don't really need a survey to know that in Brooklyn or parts of Brooklyn and in the South Bronx, obviously those resources aren't there. And schools where PTAs can bring in a lot of money, like we're talking, like my PTA brings in, right now, this year, we're at 0, because we really don't have a functioning PTA. But I know another school in Brooklyn, their PTA brings in $150,000, $200,000 a year. So they can pay several artists to come into their school. They can fund a lot of different projects that bring kids to cultural institutions, that have visiting artists or different organizations visit their schools. So, a lot really does have to do with those resources. And along with the art, the performing arts is also a dying breed in our schools. We had a performing arts teacher until about 4 years ago, and we were really developing a really strong performing arts. They were putting on these incredible plays, at the end of the school year after rehearsing and being so engrossed in that. And again, that gives students with special needs, again, such opportunity to really shine in ways that they can't academically. They just, struggle so much with the academics, but having the opportunity to act things out and just work through certain things was really something that we just supported completely. And again, we lost funding, so we had to cut back on what's called the cluster positions, or those teachers that provide preparation periods to the teachers. So, right now we have music, we have library, we have gym, and we have science for the lower grades. And that's really the 4, things that the kids go to out of their classrooms. So again, if the school doesn't get the funding for it, you have to start to cut away and make decisions about, maybe it's not that library is more important than the arts, but that's what comes out on top, sometimes. So, we've been very fortunate to, again, like I said, to really have this 21st century funding. We've had it now, this is our 13th year, so we've been through, this is our 3rd round of funding. And the kids just have benefited tremendously from having, the arts infused into their day and their fiber. And as you can see by the exhibit upstairs, it really just is, just makes me smile. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to switch now to, having laid the context for arts education in New York City in particular, sort of focus on the artists in terms of thinking about, what they bring when they come into schools, into the conversation of what arts education can be. and perhaps also what arts education should be for the 21st century as we, rethink if we have the resources, do we do the same thing, or do we really start to think about what art education means for our students, all students, for the foreseeable future. So with that, we're going to just jump back and forth and have Robert talk about his the work with Ultra Red, and also the project that you did for 4 years in London, which actually integrates the arts in an interesting way, which oftentimes in New York City, the arts are still separate subjects. So music doesn't necessarily talk to visual arts, to dance, or to theater.
Yes, sure. So I'm going to be talking about a project that I did in London, although I am based in New York City. I have never worked in the New York City public schools. Ultra Red, the art collective that I'm a part of, has been around for 20 years. And there are members based in Los Angeles, New York, a number in London, and then a few in Berlin. A few years ago, we were invited to have a residency at a new art space that had opened in Spitalfields, which is in East London. And we used this as an opportunity to initiate a new phase in our collective work, which we refer to as the School of Echoes. And the School of Echoes is a multi-year investigation on our part on how processes of popular education, a kind of radical pedagogy, can in fact be integrated into the collective work that we're doing. So I want to try and comment on two things. One is the work in a school, and then the other is a kind of shared but not necessarily uncontentious notion of pedagogy that is very dear and very important to our art practice, but also brings us in dialogue with what I would call some of the incredibly difficult conversations and transformations and actions and interventions that have been taking place in education in this country and elsewhere in the world as well. Basically initiated by neoliberalism, essentially. This is what we're talking about. So there is a kind of foundation of solidarity around fundamental questions of education that I feel personally a very profound and deep solidarity with the struggles of particularly teachers here in New York City and in New Jersey that I've been able to be in dialogue with. But let me talk just as briefly as I can about this project in London. The invitation came from the Serpentine Gallery, and the Serpentine Gallery had a relationship with a number of schools in London. One of them in particular, which is known as St Marylebone's Church of England School, has an incredibly robust art program and had had a fairly lengthy relationship with the Serpentine. And basically welcomed us, Ultra Red, with open arms. Come in and work with us. And so we initiated a 4-year-long relationship that went through multiple phases and became more and more sort of deeply immersed in the functioning of the school. A little bit of history about St Marylebone's, why it was sort of in this condition that it was in. In this particularly sort of English language that gets used around these things. So first of all, we know that in England, when I say a public school, that really means a private school. The Church of England school is a sort of a different beast on its own. So Marylebone's is a Church of England school, which meant that it was affiliated with a church, but it was a state school, right? So what we would call as a public school. But it did have some control on the part of the church that it was affiliated with. That creates a kind of cushion, a bit of autonomy that enables them to get some relief from the state education process. It had been what is referred to in the UK in this lovely language as it had been considered a sink school. And a sink school is, like the Titanic. It's on its way down, right? It's one of those schools that gets an F grade in New York City. It's a failing school. And all of the stigma, and of course, it's all associated with the same issues, the same socioeconomic, of course, the issues of race, class, that we would understand as often affiliated with what could be considered the failed schools in education departments in cities in the United States. A head teacher came in, and her remedy was not to increase academics, but was to increase the arts. And she established the most incredible art program. There was performance, there's music, dance, as well as visual arts. So there's all kinds of visual arts, even including working with fabrics, sort of textile arts, there's photography, just an incredible range of arts. And every student in the school is required to take at least one course in each and every one of these arts programs. So over the course of their high school education, the young women who go to this school have the most extraordinary constant immersion in art and all kinds of art practices. Within a matter of 3 years, that school's academic performance had risen to the highest ranking. And this became the consistent program and intervention. There was a direct correlation with the building of this incredibly robust art school. And don't even talk about a classroom. They had an entire building, all right, with dance studios, with sort of music studios, multiple arts art rooms, multiple teachers. I mean, the department, the art department, had about 12 teachers, full-time teachers in it, right? We came in at that very moment that the Cameron government was going to come in. And watched over the 4 years that I was working there, basically the dismantling of this art program through the intervention of the very same processes that we've seen basically devastating public education in this country. The implementation of this incredibly narrow focus on sort of core subjects, the academic core, all resources going towards those subjects, a complete sort of retraction of resources from the arts program, and actually the most damaging was the downgrading of arts from an A-level subject. So one of those subjects that Dimitri, one of those subjects, that you would count towards your university entrance. And with that, when it gets downgraded, where you can no longer do exams in those subjects in order to actually increase your competitiveness to go into universities in the UK, that basically is gutting what the status of the arts is all about. I'm sorry, I'm going on for too long. Very quickly, the project that we did was not just about being visiting artists in the arts. We created the largest interdisciplinary project that the school had ever had. 7 academic programs were brought together around the investigation of questions of citizenship. It began actually by reworking the geography and history curriculum. That then moved into mathematics, into economics. We went into some of the sciences, but basically brought all of these together around a kind of multidisciplinary investigation of the histories and the contemporary debates around immigration and identity in the United Kingdom. Over those 4 years, sort of continued and deepened this investigation with the students. We ended up with a series of performances. There was a large exhibition that culminated in this. At the moment, we're working on building the curriculum, on actually sort of collating and publishing the curriculum that came out of this long-term work. So I could give a lot of sort of details of the kinds of things that we did. These were two of the great challenges that I would like to sort of highlight. One was it was incredibly difficult to actually work within the highly, I mean, schools are like total institutions. They're in that sort of Goffman sense. Everything is controlled. Every action, every moment of time, the discipline around the schedule and the bodies of everybody, all right? Me beginning with, I could not walk into that school until I had had my police background check, all right? Familiar stuff, right? I mean, the level of surveillance to try and find a space for critical, creative investigation and practice was incredibly difficult. So we hustled. I mean, the spaces that you have to find, the little bits of elbow room in order to create them was incredible. One of the things that we took advantage of was that all of the students are required to do a kind of professional work experience period. They need to go out into the world and to figure out what it takes to actually be a laborer, a worker, right? So they get assigned to these horrible internships. We, through the Serpentine, had the Center for Possible Studies, and they did their work experience with us, and we just went crazy. So we had a group of students for 2 weeks, all day, all the time, and we were able to really out of school. All right, suddenly all of those, you couldn't be left alone with the students. That was lifted. Everything had to be chaperoned. There was somebody watching every action that you took, because the school had to be really careful. And who knows what was going to go back, and some sort of radical statement I might make will go back to a parent. But when you got them off-site, suddenly all of those regulations were lifted, and we had a great time. The other thing that was the most difficult, and this is where I really feel the project in a way failed, we could not work with the teachers. If we think that students live in a kind of incredible set of constraints, that is minimal compared to the constraints that teachers are placed in. The monitoring, the burdens on teachers, the levels of kind of brutality and the alienation of teachers from the vocation through the constant pressure and monitoring of the teachers, for them to even begin to imagine that they might become creative participants in this was unbelievably difficult. The last thing I'll say is sort of as a homage to the teachers, we made one of the things which is now a permanent piece in the school, a series of fabric pieces, embroideries, in which I, over the years that I was there, collected some of these contradictory statements that our teachers made about their love for their students and their struggle trying to actually protect the work that they were doing. And we've embroidered these into a series of fabric pieces that now sort of live in the hallways of that school as a homage, as a testimony, as hopefully, as I keep on saying, the condition for dialogue with the students around the educational processes that they're involved in. I'm sorry if I've gone on too long, but I will stop there. But it was 4 very, very incredible and extraordinary years, and there's a lot more that I could say if you folks are interested in hearing.
Probably come back with certain questions. And I'm going to let Joya speak, and then...
How do I turn this thing on?
It's on already.
It's on.
Hello? Okay. I relate totally to everything you've just said. Okay. I just want to give some background with Expanded Art Ideas. It started at Thread Waxing Space in 1996, and originally we were asked by one of the supervisors of the special education for District 1 to come in and help special education students get into the specialized art high schools because they thought they had an innate talent that otherwise might not be proved academically. We did start PS 140. We were in 4 schools. Over the course of time, in the Lower East Side, we ended up with PS 140. The other schools dropped away for various reasons. The program at Artist Space because we transitioned from thread waxing space to artist space, is not just, we have a team that applies for grants, we get corporate funding. It's like a very deep commitment of artist space in order to have this program. When we first started to go into the schools, there was something called Project Arts in the schools. And that was given to each school for arts funding. Under Mayor Bloomberg, Project Arts was decimated so that funding, I think you could speak more to it than I could.
Well, the funding declines that I was talking about all started when Project Arts was basically eliminated.
Okay. So there were a number of schools where we would always have certain funding, as would other arts organizations, and that was wiped out. So 21st Century came. So it's been an evolving situation over many years. As an artist who has sort of, at sometimes I feel I've been in the trenches, but my objective in starting that, when I was asked to start it, is to think of it as how an artist would envision an art education program, because we are, we go into the schools, so part of what we do is like an intervention, in terms of creative thinking. And in terms of the people who are on the team, everyone's a professional exhibiting artist, highly committed to their own practice, highly committed to having dialogues with the students and the educators, if they wish. Some educators don't wish that, some do. But over the course of the years, the biggest, I think, if you call it an obstruction, has been the focus on the testing. And the testing I've seen, as someone who's sort of outside, is when the students are judged, am I correct? 1, 2, 3, 4? And so a student whose test is 1 is bad, right? 1 is bad, 4 is good. I thought, what if you're like 12 years old and you just think I'm a 2? I mean, this to me is like, I didn't have that when I went to school, so that idea of that constraint on and also in terms of how we program the artists coming in, some of our projects in both schools, the teachers are so consumed with the thought of the testing, preparing for the testing, that we have to, how we come in with some of our projects, not the after school, but during the school hours, has to be sort of figured out in order so that the teachers are relieved once the testing's over, then we can come in. Right. So, and my last thought, I hand it to Joy now, talk, is that the testing, I wonder whether that really gives the focus on the testing, I think it hampers, without the focus on the arts, a way of really expanding your knowledge into different ways of thinking. And that's the most important thing. If you're always like doing a number testing, what about that writing? What about the way where you can just go off and explore something? And so the artists that work in our program, have that dialogue with the students. And so I'm going to hand it over to Joy.
Well, I was just thinking what you were saying. The other thing that's happened with Artist Space being in the school and the artists working with the students is that they've now been able to put together a portfolio and test out of this public school on the Lower East Side that doesn't have any money, and who the kids' parents, if they're under enormous constraints, and they're testing out into LaGuardia, into Bard, into the Performing Arts School. That's only happened, in the last 5 years? So I'm working with you guys, you said 9, I thought 8. There you go. It's fluid.
It keeps expanding, Joy.
Yes. Anyway, that just shows you that these kids are, as talented smart if you put them in the right position so they can get something that they wouldn't necessarily get, then they can move forward in the world. And these kids are our future, right? I mean, they're going to be running the world. So wouldn't you want a kid who knows how to look at something and really pay attention and have the ability to share with the other people that they're working with? So like in my photo class, we do critiques after each time we've gone out and photographed. And it's fascinating to hear how they think about what they're looking at of each other's work, you know. The other thing I was thinking about was timing. You know, we say that my class, is going to be, I don't even know what it is this year. Every year it changes. You know, maybe it's from 1:30 to 3. Maybe I get it to 3:30, but, I'll have 3 kids that have to pick up their little brother or little sister because they're responsible for that kid to, you know, their brother or sister to take them home. So there's a constraint even on our amount of time that we get to spend with the students. And also where it's actually going to take place.
Right.
And every time I manage to have 12 students each time we've done this. And we've purchased a couple of used cameras. They're learning 35 millimeter film. And I've gotten some cameras donated to us, and of course, I'll put a plea out for anybody who wants to get rid of their old 35. We'll take it. But I actually have 3 decent working cameras, so with 12 students, they're cut up into groups of 4, and that's how we go outside. And then I have to have somebody from the school come with me. And that's all fine, but it's a lot of, you know, manipulating. And even when I get there for a class, and this is no one's fault, they're all over the place, right? Some teachers decided, no, they have to be here, and we have to get them out of the class. Nothing is smooth about it. You keep pushing, and in the final analysis, the best stuff comes out when you're finally with the students, and they've got this camera in their hand, and they just love it. They love how it works, they love the mechanics of it, they love how it feels, and you get to see them, what their vision is. You know, they're learning how to frame something, right? All those things are important, just how they go through their lives. I think it's made a big difference. So, I don't know where any of that money is that you've been talking about.
I want to make one more comment. There's also a lot of pressure on the numbers, which we talked about with the certain grants. And this program has always been focused on us having the lowest number possible artist to student. So, if at all possible. So this has been a big, and it's a looming potential obstacle coming up with, you know, that we are to increase our numbers to get the same funding that we have. So instead of having 12 students, we're supposed to do 20 or 30, so or something like that. But, you know, in order for Joy to be able to really work and have that dialogue with the students, I like to think that Artist Space will be able to keep our classes, I'm going to use the word mentorship, you know, of artist to student, which is really important. So that promotes a higher level of dialogue and mutual respect, which I think is so, so important. Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to pull together a couple of points and then open it up for questions that the audience might have. I think one of the issues that I'm hearing is, yes, for the next 4 years, there's going to be an increase in funding for the arts, which is really good. But at the same time, there is, with Obama, and I'm not sure how it will manifest after he is no longer in office, but at the moment, there is the race to the top. So you have these contradictions and how they're going to work out. So you have more money for the arts, but you also have standardization and accountability, not only for students, but also for teachers, given that I work with training pre-service art teachers. the Common Core is something that they all have to understand and partake in. And so it's interesting to think about how these work. And then I think it raises the question that doesn't oftentimes get raised is, what kind of art education do we want? Especially at this moment and at this time, given the realities in our society, in our communities, and our nation and our world. So given the geopolitical ways in which, and the inequities which have always been present in schools, you know, what can arts education do? And what do we want it to do as we move forward? So that the students can actually do the Common Core, the teachers can do what they need to do, because they are incredibly constrained. But there are ways in which you can work around those constraints if you want to. But you know, what does that mean? And I think that's something that we really need to, as educators and artists, sort of think about, like, how do we move the conversation so that it doesn't stall at Common Core. So I can't have to do Common Cores, I have to do the standardized, I can't do the arts. Rather than saying the arts could be a way in which the Common Core still can be done. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think one of the points that you mentioned earlier is, I think part of the issue is because it's so constrained, it's so compartmentalized, and so there is no interdisciplinarity. Teachers don't have the time to talk to each other. So to figure out how you can put the arts in dialogue with, whether it's science or it's history or it's social studies or it's English, you know, artists are breaking those boundaries constantly. Contemporary artists in particular break those boundaries, but this institutionalization of art has kept those boundaries pretty much in place, and we haven't really broken that. So it'd be interesting to figure out how that can happen, so we have a conversation that is school-wide, and then perhaps there could be some change. Because there is always going to be impositions from the top down in terms of standardization. That's not new. So, you know, it was, under Bush, it was No Child Left Behind. Now it's Race to the Top or the Bottom. One of those, it'll be something else with whoever's the new president, and
I guess what I was just wondering about was, I mean, when I went to school, and I'm guessing all of you went to school, there was an art program in the school. Always. So why, I mean, as an artist, I don't understand at all what, you know, like what you were saying, it's now not a part of what a student could then test for or whatever to be part of what they think they're going to do in their lives. I mean, I don't understand why it's even been taken out of the school.
Well,
To begin with, I don't get that.
it's actually cyclical. If you look at art education,
Yeah.
it hasn't been in the schools all the time in the history of the United States. So, you know, it was
But I
brought
mean,
in, you know, and then it was taken out.
It's been taken out. That's what
And
I'm
then it
trying to
gets
say, is
brought
like-
back in, and then
Yeah.
it gets, whenever there's a fiscal crisis, the arts are the first to go. And this is not the first fiscal crisis
No,
we've had. In
I
the
agree.
70s, when
Right.
New York City almost shut down, the arts were removed completely. They've been removed in California and have
Yeah.
never been brought
Yeah.
back.
No, I understand that. I mean, I get that. I'm just saying, as a thinking person,
Right.
I don't understand. I mean, don't, all these people who, you know, Common Core and all these people make all these rules, do they go to the theater? Do they go see a movie? I don't know, do they take pictures? It just seems kind of really obvious in a way that would be something that they should consider as an important part of learning.
Yeah, I think a lot.
Citizenship, everything.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, unfortunately, I think that a lot of our education decisions are being made by elected officials and not necessarily educators or parents or families. And that's becoming more and more the case. With No Child Left Behind, I think kind of kicked open the door a little bit for a little more intervention of elected officials in education. And they're looking, they're getting elected, running for office every 2 years or every 4 years, whatever it may be. And so they're looking for quick results, and they're looking for something that could be measured to say, I improved graduation rates by 12%, but they're not looking at the impact it has on some of those finer points and the real development of a whole child and someone who understands culture and how to think creatively. Like, you can't measure some of that stuff too well. They know that you can measure test scores, and so that's kind of been the game in town, I think.
But the other point is, recently we got the results from Scholastic Awards. And if you look at the list, and you see the amount of awards given to students from private schools, and also from the very esteemed public art schools like LaGuardia. But if you look at that list, it tells you a lot about the state of the arts in New York City. It really does. And it isn't, we got 3 honorable mentions, and we're happy for that. But when you look at that list, you just sort of, what would you say, looking at that list?
I can't say it publicly. Well, no, last year we received 1 gold, 2 silver, and I think 3 honorable mentions. And there was also a lot of more representation of middle schools in general. Because remember, they're competing really against high school art. But the middle schools are included, we're allowed to participate, and last year there definitely was more of a representation of middle schools. This year, it's almost like non-existent. The fact that they got honorable mentions.
But that's okay. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're a middle school that has no money, and no arts program, right? But we get 3 honorable mentions against 11,000. There's 11,000 people students that put in for this.
So we're happy for our awards. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong.
But that just shows you our ability.
Yeah.
If you let us do
Yeah.
what we want to
Yeah,
do.
exactly. And it also shows you that the more well-funded schools have the resources to give their students a higher level of opportunities. So I'm not putting down Scholastic, I'm just talking about resources here. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on something in relation to this kind of sense that the relationship between schools in New York City and arts organizations in New York City is really important and pivotal, and there's an increase in funding to encourage those kind of relationships. So there's a kind of sense of dependency there, or at least that arts organizations can bring something to the school that isn't going to be there, if it's not from outside. But I wanted to ask Robert just the question of how arts organizations function in order to enable leverage to go beyond the conventional educational environment and to do something that Ultra Ed did, which is incredible as a 4-year project. That it seems like there's a real need, that there's several factors coming together at once to make that possible. That it's that there's a commitment there from other people to enable that kind of those kind of activities to occur in a school environment, and not to just close it down straight away. So I wonder, in terms of, because this is something we talk about a lot at Artist Space, is we feel like we're in a situation where we're providing, it's basic provision is what we're doing. We're not really able to go beyond that. And the question is, how do you gain the leverage to do something on the scale of what Ultra Ed did in London, because that's where we should be heading,
I mean, I just don't know the school system here, so I wouldn't even begin to know how you would sort of translate the situation from there to here. I think one of the things is this question that Dipti has asked, which is what kind of art education do we want to have? Yeah. And part of what had happened in the situation in London was that there was a long-term relationship, like it sounds as though Artist Space has with the school, so that there was a great deal of trust. I think also the fact that the Serpentine had been bringing in a great deal of resources in order to be able to sort of create a kind of space for experimentation, that it wasn't all dependent on the school budget. So you weren't just sort of scraping together. I mean, the tendency initially when we went in, the tendency was for the teachers to say like, wow, I've got a couple of periods that I'm not going to have to kind of lead the class, all right? And these artists are going to come in and they're going to take over the students for me, and I'm going to get to take a breath, right? That became the sort of initial, so this is how we were initially going to be used. But
Did the teachers participate at all, or did they sit in the back of the classroom?
they were the disciplinarians, basically. You know, it was like, no, do not do that. That would be constantly the sort of the debrief with the students was, do not do that. All right, this is an opportunity for you to speak in a different way, for you to become sort of, and it was through the negotiation with that, but I also think because there had been this long-term relationship with the Serpentine, there was a level of sort of trust that that made it possible for us to do those kinds of adjustments, those debriefs, to say, you know, let's do this in a different way. Let's not have you constantly default to the role of being the person who controls the classroom space or defends us, protects us, because, you know, those high school kids are not easy. They can be pretty cruel. You know, pushing and testing those limits, which becomes a really exciting, actually, opportunity in those sorts of spaces to do those sorts of things. So, I mean, that's the sort of best I can do in terms of a response. I do think that there is something about these long-term relationships and finding, as Dipti, you're sort of saying, finding those kinds of moments in a curriculum and in a day and in just those magic sort of spaces where you have to move incredibly quickly and make something happen. It requires a sort of a level of creativity. And that, over 4 years, I built really close relationships with some of those teachers. And so by year 2, was able to start making suggestions for how to do things, and they knew that I would follow through. They knew that they could trust me, that there would be a level of robustness. I would study the curriculum. I would fill out the Ofsted forms, which is these endless forms of learning objectives and, you know, those kinds of things. But basically became really practiced a kind of partnership with them around the running of the institution, frankly, by becoming really familiar with how it worked, and in that way could begin to think creatively. So, you know, I think that really is the issue is this long-term relationship. And what does it mean for an artist to come in for a week? That's fine, but it's going to be a very limited capacity to sort of build a program. For us to be able to have returned over and over and over, and frankly, we would, you know, still be there if there were different circumstances. It could have been a kind of endless residency with that school.
Also, I have the microphone to pass around. So.
Okay. My question is kind of around this policy stuff. It seems like it's obvious that a long-term relationship is necessary to kind of facilitate this process, and given the kind of whims of politics, you know, the political sphere is not really going to allow for that. What kind of oversight is there for this money? Because it's great to say there'll be $92 million infused in the arts, but if those teachers just become facilitators of test prep or, you know, whatever else may come of the budgets, because a lot of these schools are already the lowest performing, so they're already kind of under the knife, if you will, or the gun, whatever the metaphor is. What's the guarantee that that money is going to even see art materials in schools? And I mean, yes, teachers are one thing, right? That's something you can fill in a spreadsheet, but it's the whole question of data seems counter to the project of the arts in school. And so where's that reconciliation?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that we're going to be taking on as an organization, is kind of tracking how this money is spent and continuing to advocate for it to be spent in ways that will have the most impact. And so it's not just a chunk of money that's being spread out equally amongst all schools. There are specific, very discrete programs that principals need to apply for. And so, you know, the Department of Ed has an arts office. It used to be about 4 or 5 staff members, and part of this money went towards them staffing up. They hired 4 more people centrally, and now they have a director of the arts for every single borough in New York City. This is brand new. They just were hired like a month ago, and so they will be helping work with the schools that are underserved in the arts and maximize these opportunities. What I would mention in terms of what's critical really at the end of the day towards getting the most bang for the buck is having school leadership that really understands the importance of arts education and supports it. When you have a principal that gets it and knows the value and has worked in schools that have good arts programming, they see what it means to the kids and to the entire school community, and those principals make sure it's part of the day. Unfortunately, you have so many principals that might not have grown up and had a really great arts education program in the schools they went to, and then if they've been hired in the last 5 to 10 years, they went through this leadership academy that was all about data collection and how do you leverage data, and it was all about CEO kind of corporate accountability, and there was no arts education component to the training of principals in New York City for a number of years. And so those things need to be changed to really make sure it really grows, and that what this money is hopefully seed money to help those programs grow. And so when the money was announced, our organization was very vocal about ensuring that this money really went towards hiring art teachers, that was a very significant component of it. We believe partnerships with arts and culture organizations are absolutely critical, but a $15,000 grant for a couple weeks residency just can vanish like this, right? But when you put an art teacher in a school, that's really the anchor and the root for quality arts programming to develop. And you're talking about schools with hundreds of kids, no art teacher at all. That one teacher really has the opportunity to transform that school. And so we pushed really hard for that. And the way it works actually is the city now will match 50% of the salary for that art teacher for 2 years. For a new arts teacher that hired, and the thought is that eventually the school will have to pay for it on their own, but for now they're being provided with a little breathing room and not having to put up as much money up front to bring a new teacher on, and then they can figure out over 2 years how they can fund that, and this will give that teacher the opportunity to really cement themselves in the school culture and community, and it will create the will amongst the school body and the parents and the students to keep that arts teacher on staff. And then from there, hopefully it grows and you really build something sustainable.
I think I recently read, I might be remembering this wrong because I read it quickly, there was a study that Obama kind of launched with, I think, 7 schools across the country where they poured money for 2 years. And I sort of vaguely remember reading that it improved the grades in most of those schools. And I think that it seems with all the constraints, there's a kind of not wanting to take that risk or jump of faith when you've got so much on your plate but when arts education could actually help to solve some of the things that, like you said, with that particular school, the remedy of that head teacher was to pour arts into that failing school. And I think in Obama's study, like the one school, Portland, that failed was because the art teachers and the principal just didn't commit to the program, at least in the article I read about it. And I wondered if that study, or if that kind of trying to develop head teachers that have faith in those kinds of things on a wider scale would have any impact on everything here. Yeah.
Well, I'll let our friends in the schools answer that, but I'll just, of course, as I said, that's the most critical component. You need a school leader that understands the importance and the value, and has, there are many other components too, but I think that's the most critical piece, and then they figure out how to make it happen. But just commenting on that, it's called the Turnaround Arts Initiative, and it's interesting that it's not just about saying these kids really learned how to, they're concert pianists after this program, or they know how to, all the techniques of painting. That program actually has been sold in terms of its impact on attendance and graduation rates, and its impact upon test scores in English language arts and math, which is good and bad. But we're recognizing now we need to really talk the talk of what educators and parents care about, and those are things that you can't provide a good education if kids not coming to school every day. So when you talk to a principal about, look, kids love the arts, they, if you schedule it, on Fridays and Mondays, attendance goes up, like it engages kids in their learning. Now you're kind of talking to a broader audience a little bit, and you're addressing multiple concerns and issues that our schools are facing.
Perhaps I'm being a little naive, and forgive me, and I don't mean to be challenging or provocative, but the amazing resources that you all bring together tonight, I'm just wondering, how is it that we can help steer this process? What is it that we can do as a community to contribute to maybe answering this question about what kind of art education do we want? What can we do together? I guess that's my main, why are we here? What's next?
I'm just going to put in, I think it seems to be a moment, there seems to be a moment where we should be able to do something, and we should be doing something, but I do think we need to work collectively. I mean, what's interesting is Arts Space has this, it's brought together people from artists and policymakers and people who teach art education together, and Art 21 is having a similar symposium a couple of weeks from now. So it seems like this might be the moment when one can work collaboratively across. I don't think one can do this alone. So higher ed needs to work with arts, cultural organizations, with schools, in artists, to sort of, as a collective, start to make, sort of think of ways to make this change and, shift. You talk about principals. None of the principals that get trained in higher education in any of the universities take any arts classes. So, it's just not even thought about. Like at NYU, higher education has nothing to do with art. So they train principals to go out into the schools, but they don't take even one art class. So there is, even at the higher ed, we don't have these conversations where art, gets sort of talked about. I was starting a new educational studies program, and I literally had to insert myself into the process at NYU and said, aesthetic education needs to be there, and it needs to be in the first line of what we're doing in terms of educational policy. They'll be training, educators. Aesthetics, yeah. And so I think this might be the moment to work collectively across, various sectors to figure out, okay, what do we do and how do we move forward?
Can I just make a little bit of an observation, which is in response to this as well? So one of the things that's really difficult about doing this work is that you're caught in a kind of a contradiction. And this contradiction in a certain sense, so the question I would sort of say is not only what kind of art education do we want, but what kind of education do we want? And what would it mean to actually have that conversation include the discussion about or discussions with artists, or including this conversation of art in that as a whole? Because in a fundamental sense, the education system is an institution for the process of a certain kind of a reproduction of a certain set of social structures and social practices. And very quickly, as an artist, you can find yourself sort of instrumentalized into that process, where you are part of the process of reproducing some of the very same sorts of terms of education that are in place. And I think that we're in a point in this country where this conversation about what is the role of education, I cannot fathom what it must be like to be a teacher under these kinds of conditions, where every day you're being asked, in a certain sense, to reproduce many of the same conditions that that would be an absolute anathema to you, in a certain sense. And I'll give a very concrete example of this from the UK system. And this points to where I think art sort of sits in the midst of these contradictions in a very crucial way. Arts education in the United Kingdom actually does survive, and it has received a great deal of support from the Tory government, from this Conservative government, because it is seen as the foundation for entrepreneurialism. All right? It is seen as crucial to the producing of people who are going to be able to function within the new systems of flexibility, which means those new systems of precarity, which means those new systems where you in fact have to be your own boss, those new systems of social insecurity and social inequality. And so you have this, I mean, and we know this, artists in many ways are the prime example of the flexible laborer. We will often say, don't pay us because we do it for the love of it, all right? We work on projects, all right, as contract labor, all right? There's no need for retirements, there's no need for health benefits. I mean, we are the subjects of, of precarity and of flexibility in many ways. We are what the global worker and laborer should be. And so in a certain sense, this question of what are our education systems geared towards producing in terms of this, what I would call the kind of social citizen, the person who is going to function within society, not just as a laborer within society in a certain sense, but also as one of the actors of the reproduction of society. So I think this question, of what kind of an education do we want, and seeing this question of the arts within the education system as really raising to a point of crisis this issue of a kind of discipline versus a certain notion of freedom, to the extent that the arts retain that kind of, it's ridiculous to even hear myself saying this, but to sort of preserve in some sense the notion of the arts as a kind of place for the practice of freedom. I think it becomes the possibility for a deep critical conversation, or a continuing of these deep critical conversations about what is happening with the education system in this country, and what are the political implications of that. What kinds of social violence is being enacted through these institutions and to these institutions, and how can we work in solidarity? And this is where I point to the solidarity with the teachers as a whole. Not just can we get art educators into the schools, but how is the profession of the teacher, how is the role of the teacher, in fact, in a state of crisis at this point, and how can we be working together in a kind of collectivity, in a structure of solidarity, to really begin to hold open some of these questions about education.
Somebody, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Just as a side note, I've been very concerned with the politics over the past 10 or 15 years with the demonization of the teacher as a whole, in terms of, I think we've seen it in New Jersey specifically, and I think it's undeserved. If I was a public school teacher, my morale would have gone quite low with some of the things you read in the New York Post or whatever. For me, when I was in high school, we had an open art room, which meant when there wasn't an art class, you could just go and work. Very similar to a university structure. That would be amazing to happen in the New York City, to have an open art room. So that, yes, there are classes, but when there are not classes, students can just go in, they can draw, they can paint, they can work on a computer. Maybe there's someone hanging out there just to watch. But that kind of free expression of being able to investigate on your own, and it can be for writing too, would be something I'd love to see. Now, maybe you have to have that in an outside space, outside of a school system. I would love to see an art organizations like Artist Space and the Way Future be able to provide that for youth? Because I think that's sort of what's missing. And a lot of the artists I know had the ability to do that in their educational process, where there was a lot more freedom. And I think the way I find it very interesting what you said about the Tory government and the commercialization of art education. So anyways, those are my thoughts.
Can I, before we move on, can I just answer this question too? I'm sorry. Two quick comments. One is, I think we have a really great window of opportunity right now. You know, No Child Left Behind, I think, was so powerful and oppressive in many ways, and it just created this focus on testing, you know, in districts and schools across the country, and there were real, here in New York City, rewards and consequences. $20,000 bonuses for a principal if they improved, you know, their test scores year to year. Schools could be closed, principals could be fired, the entire school staff can be fired if they didn't meet adequate yearly progress. Powerful stuff. There's a backlash that's been happening towards No Child Left Behind, towards Race to the Top, and even towards the Common Core that I think presents a great opportunity now to talk about what does a good education really look like? What do we want? We were so focused on testing and test prep, and even if that wasn't the way that your vision for education, the pressures were so intense upon principals and schools to adhere to that. That has been lifted somewhat, I think, and now is the window of opportunity for us all to speak out about what a school day looks like and what we expect our education system to be. And so I urge everyone to advocate for that, and to the degree that you can, to share these stories about the impact and the power of arts education with elected officials and others. And so along those lines, because I'm always an advocate, this new funding, we need to make sure this new funding for arts education here in the city is in the budget every year for the next 4 years, and maybe even starts to grow. And we need to show the mayor and the speaker of the city council that this is a good investment and people care about it, because otherwise it flies under the radar, and there's so many other competing priorities in our schools and in our city that this $23 million could become $10 million in 2 years from now. So I actually brought something in my bag in the back, a little piece of paper that has a website address. You can go and send a very quick thank you, Mayor, thank you, Speaker, for this important investment in our public school students. Let's keep it up. Let's continue to improve and expand and make sure arts are part of the school day. And I'm gonna have that in the back, and I'll figure out a way to pass it out before the end of today.
Is this vulnerable at all to the governor? I mean, the governor has set us a really impossible choice at this point. More money and increased control over the teachers, or a weakening of teachers' security, or preserve the status quo of the teachers but no money. Is this affecting this in any way?
Well, I don't think it'll necessarily affect this new funding line, but yes, it could have a real serious impact on public schools. And one thing about the constraints on teachers, this new evaluation system that they've created across the country, really, as part of the Race to the Top, you have to figure out a way to evaluate all your teachers. They actually evaluate gym teachers, physical education teachers, and art teachers based on how well schools do on English language, arts, and math. Exactly. And so what's interesting, the governor wants to expand that up to 50% of your performance evaluation based on test scores. So there's a lawsuit right now in the courts in Tennessee of a phys ed teacher and an arts teacher suing and saying it's arbitrary and capricious to judge me based on how well kids are doing in English language arts scores, because I don't really have a direct impact on that. And how can you hold my performance? How could you fire me or hold back pay or whatever it is based on something I can't control? And so this is, for me, it's another sign of optimism that, like, people are starting to figure out that we've been going down the wrong path for a while.
Hello, you hear me? I'm an art teacher in the South Bronx, and I want to say first to you that I got $1,000 from the mayor, each art teacher, and it was dedicated to the art teacher in the school. It didn't go somewhere to a principal or somebody else, so I'm very glad about this. But the reality where I'm teaching is pretty rough, and I have to say the contradiction we teachers have to deal with every day is really hard. And it's not only the curriculum and so on, it's a social problem we have, especially in the South Bronx. The students are really difficult. And I speak for, it's a bottom feeder school. the better schools, the better kids get all to the charter schools. But on a daily basis, I have kids, and I have the worst kids in the school, special education kids. They all have a different, I don't know, mental illness, and they have social problems, they are bipolar, they're on medication, and that's the world we live in. And it's a big quantity of students who have these problems. And as an art teacher, you can be a therapeutic methods you can use. You can have fun with the student, it's very funny, but on a daily basis, it's really radical. It's actually really sad. But I think the importance is to understand what education is doing. Education should lift the kids out of their bad neighborhood where they're coming from. And their art education is a very, very important function. I think art education, visual arts, is the only subject where kids can really learn to be themselves, to get involved. I'm going back in my classes to paint with water paints and drawing, because if a kid sits for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, doing only a little sketch or something, as maybe you know, Vygotsky said already before, a long time before, there's an inner dialogue going on. And this inner dialogue is the basis for all academic learning. And he made studies in Russia in 1918, I think, saying that families who never had any art education, or analphabetic groups who never had any freedom, they couldn't learn later on mathematics. And I think that's where we are now in a pretty similar situation in the ghetto. You have kids who I don't know, like.
Hello, I'm an interdisciplinary transmedia multi-format artist working across art forms for my entire life. My parents were artists, so I had the benefit of a childhood surrounded by geniuses. It did me a lot of good. I can't imagine what I would be if I did not have my art every single day. It saves me. I don't speak of art as medicine or therapy. I speak of it as the thing that saved my life and continues to every moment. I've started my own arts program, and first of all, I want to say thank you for this beautiful panel. I was so moved, so touched, and so humbled by every one of you. When I came in, Joy was on the video, talking with her students so beautifully, so kind, encouraging, this wonderful, modern, contemporary art aesthetic, and yet so nurturing, and the photographs are just gorgeous. The equal of anything you see anywhere. Congratulations. I have started a program to see what art, this is something that I've done as an artist. I suggest this to you. This is really my answer to you. I am the executive director of the New York Underground Museum. I founded it 8 years ago with Arlene Schloss and Baird Jones. And our mission was to curate, present, and preserve the work of visionary artists. But voices kept speaking to me. I have a studio on 2nd Street between B and C, and I began to see the children walking by and talking with the mothers, mostly single mothers that I know, and I began to realize how rough the public schools are in our neighborhood, and I thought that these children should have access to beauty, music, art, and performance, as I do. So my question to all of you in the room is, I'm looking for children who would like to be part of our program. I am a nonprofit. I have 8 wonderful artists, from the guitarist for Marilyn Manson to Hilary Knight, the illustrator for the book Eloise. A wonderful range of brilliant, generous artists, all working volunteer. We are looking for children ages 9 to 12 for a program that will occur in my garden at the New York Underground Museum. and it will be July 13th through the 20th. 5 days, with Saturday being the family day at the museum. So if any of you principals have children, or any of you art teachers have children that you think would be good for this, or if you want to volunteer, just see me after this wonderful panel, and thank you again.
Sorry, I feel like standing. I just wanted to respond actually to your comment. I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. I just also think that when working in underserved populations, I think it's really important to not overlook the strong tendency, I think that's happening recently, to over-diagnose, over-medicate students of color, particularly black students, as having behavioral issues or having developmental disabilities that I'm not sure are real, but that we want to diagnose to address a problem that is in a misguided attempt to diagnose a problem that I think it's found in the context that these students are coming from. Less a question, more of a, I think, a constant reminder to us all to watch our language and see students that we perceive as misbehaving and really question more deeply the context and whether these behaviors are more of a response to the tough shit that's going on in their lives. You know?
Yes.
That's just all I would say.
I just have a quick question, again, back to policy and funding, which is, can't the city secure that funding by linking it to, some taxes, such as hotel tax or transportation tax, or something that is constantly filling the coffers? Has that been explored?
I don't know if it has here in New York City. I mean, the money now is an agreement between the mayor and the city council, comes from general tax levy, basically. Portland, Oregon just passed a tax, I guess last November or so, on all residents, and a portion of that goes towards arts education in city schools, which was interesting. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but some of those things go up and down, and it's good to have a dedicated commitment, from the city government. But I haven't heard it talked about here in New York City.
Sorry, what? One last question, which is, because the audience here is, I'm guessing, a lot of educators and artists. Are there opportunities of maybe influencing our council members or the principals of how can individual artists play a role, whether it be after-school programming or volunteer or PTA organizing or something like that? Are there any recommendations that the panel has?
It really depends on the outreach done by those artists, because even though we are very committed and have this intense relationship with Artist Space, there are other artists that do come to our school to offer their services as well. It's not as long-term, the programs are not as long-term, but we welcome those as well, and also depending on, what the goal is for the school or for a particular grade. We're pre-K to 8, so that's a big range. And sometimes what might be appropriate for middle school might not be appropriate for the little ones, and vice versa. But, our doors are always open. So it really depends on sort of the vision of the administration and how they value art. If they value art, then they're going to want it for their children, but sometimes that just doesn't work quite that way. And one of my questions to you, actually, along those lines is, you made a statement that said principals need to apply. Then that doesn't give me much hope for that many schools getting art.
Here's already one of the ways that we think they can improve the program is, I don't think they've done a great job of disseminating information and really kind of marketing and branding this initiative. And,
I didn't know
and
about
so the schools that are going to apply for the partnerships, a lot of times it's schools that already have partners and be like, hey, let's
Right.
apply for this because
Right.
they've heard about it. So yes, there needs to be much more outreach to schools
Right.
that are, don't have, are underserved in the arts. And so the hiring of the new borough arts directors, their top job, number one priority is to work with those schools that are identified as having little to no arts. So that now there's going to be someone in place for next school year and for the rest of this year to really help find those opportunities and bring them to the schools that need them. But you're absolutely right.
They need to visit the schools.
Well, we've actually been going to CEC meetings.
Do we know who this person is for PS 140?
I don't, but the Office of Arts and Special Projects, I mean, these people have been hired as of a month ago, and so there's one for each borough.
Okay.
The school now?
No.
Thank you. Just one additional comment, perhaps. I just have a sense that there are a lot of short-term solutions and out-of-the-box ideas and creativity that's sort of here in the collective resource in the room. I just want to suggest something to your collective brilliance and individual minds. But it seems as though in the interdisciplinary context, that the educators who are not art educators, who are academic educators, need to have art education. So that's, addressing the next generation, the next cycle, okay, that could occur in a rather, immediate time frame if there were a lobby for that, and perhaps it's a European model. Perhaps that comes from Pestalozzi, from these other deeper roots in the European model, which may, in fact, inform what's occurring in England. Because the interdisciplinary foundation, the groundwork, has to be somehow coexistent in the minds of the academic educators. Otherwise, what's the dialogue going to be? There's no vocabulary, there's no shared aesthetic sensibility and the criteria, for aesthetics or even a dialogue in that level. So I just want to encourage that kind of conversation too, in a far-reaching, deeper, impact level.
From my experience in the 90s, there was a lot more artists and arts organization being able to do special teacher training projects with the teachers, special arts, where the teachers would be able to experience things. The quilt in the back room was part of that project. Those monies diminished a lot over the past 10 years. So that's from my experience.
Maybe this new infusion of millions.
Well, I was just going to say, you want to hear something kind of crazy?
Something else.
Something else. Universal pre-kindergarten. This is like the mayor's big, great signature initiative. Until this money came along, so they're hiring hundreds of new pre-K teachers, right? Not only for public schools, but for community centers. And I think it's a fantastic initiative. I love it. Don't ever get me wrong. They started the training and bringing these teachers on board. There was, pre-K teachers that have not worked in the schools. There was no arts education component to their training until this money came up. And then they said, why don't we provide them with developmentally appropriate lessons and training in how to use music and dance and theater and visual arts in the pre-K classroom. Somehow they overlook that. And it's so central to education, especially at that age. And so this is good news that this money came along and then they added an arts education component for all the pre-K teachers. And so that's good. The other thing I was going to mention, we talked about principals not necessarily getting the arts as part of their leadership training, but I believe this is the case in higher ed and the teachers' colleges here in New York, that general classroom teachers, your, what do they call them?
The elementary and secondary classroom teachers.
Yeah, they don't have any arts component for a general first or second or third grade teacher required in their certification program. And so that's a potential area where, we can work to advocate and have conversations and dialogues with our teachers college. We have some great teaching universities here in New York, and to get them to include that as as part of their requirement.
Well, it's just that the state actually took it away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we used to train elementary teachers. In Wisconsin, they still have it, but in New York State, when the certification changed about 7 or 8 years ago, they eliminated arts for all elementary teachers. And so it's not part of certification requirement, which means you just can't. You're not going to have universities put it on. Some universities might, but if it's an expensive university like NYU, that's a lot of extra money.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something we can all advocate for if we believe in it.
I think that might be a moment to draw it to a close and say thank you to everybody for a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.